In a previous video titled Jolly Old Elf, I went over the pagan origins of Santa Claus, the amalgamation of several different characters, and one of those was St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas was a supposed bishop/deacon from Myra in Lycia, Turkey, and I had said essentially Odin with a bishop's robe on. Now see, here is his statue with the twigs and all. A commenter on that video said, "I wonder if there's a correlation of St. Nicholas with Nicholas of Antioch, a church steward in Acts 6, and the Nicolaitans. Nicholas of Antioch prostituted his wife as a gift to converts to Christianity on Christian holidays and introduced pagan elements into the early church. He was appointed as a deacon along with Stephen in Acts 6. He was in Ephesus. He was a pagan who converted to a different branch of paganism than Judaism, then to Christianity. He introduced several sexual, occult, and pagan traditions into the early church, including sex magic on feast days celebrating Jesus. St. Nicholas also prostituted his wife as a gift on Christian holidays, according to early church historians." So, the Nicolaitans were a Christian sect in Asia Minor in Ephesus and Pergamum, which is Turkey, and they practiced immorality and idolatry and were considered heretical by the early Christian church. They believed it was acceptable to be involved with both the world and Christianity, and they practiced unrestrained indulgence, used Christian liberty to pursue their own desires. They were associated with Balaam, who taught the Israelites to commit fornication and eat food sacrificed to idols. And I'm going to play you some of that commenter's video now.
This you have in your favor. You hate the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. The Nicolaitans followed Nicholas, a deacon or a steward, from Acts 6:5. He converted from paganism to Judaism to Christianity. He was always looking for something new, and he was a very liberal person. This man, whom some could call Saint Nicholas, introduced pagan doctrine into the early church, including prostituting his wife out on festivals celebrating the existence of Jesus, like Easter, for example, or Christmas. A Saint Nicholas prostituting his wife out on Christmas as a gift for other converts. Google, who were the Nicolaitans?
So I did Google who were the Nicolaitans, and there's a very good chance that same St. Nicholas was the founder of the Nicolaitans in the Bible, because it was the same time frame in Turkey and part of the early Christian sect, around 300 AD. The Nicolaitans were a group of people whose works both the church of Ephesus and John condemned. In Revelation 2, John, from Jesus through the angel encounter in Revelation to the church in Ephesus, said in verse 6, "But you have this in your favor. You hate the practices of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate." And then in verse 15 to the church of Pergamum, he said that he holds it against them that they hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans. So this is the symbol on the Wikipedia page for them. And it says it's a trace of the image of Abraxas stone from the Gnostics and their remains. And the Greek letters are IAO, which is I Alpha Omega, which means the eternal sun. Nicolaism was an early church sect mentioned twice in that book of Revelation. And what is the time frame of the early Christian sect? From Jesus up to the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And that was the same time that St. Nicholas was supposedly alive, which they say was 270 AD to 343 AD. That's if he was even a real person. You know that sometimes these saints are not real people. It says very little is known about St. Nicholas' historical life, and they say that is not surprising because he lived during a turbulent time in Roman history. It says accounts of St. Nicholas's life agree on the essence of his story, but modern historians disagree regarding how much of the story is actually rooted in historical fact. Traditionally, Nicholas was born at a port in the Mediterranean Sea in Asia Minor in the Roman Empire to a wealthy family of Greek Christians. Other scholars think that the group's name was a descriptive word. Nikos means victory in Greek, and laos means people, or more specifically, the lay people. Hence, they take the word to mean conquerors of the lay people. The name Balaam is perhaps capable of being interpreted as a Hebrew equivalent of the Greek Nicholas. Some commenters think that John alludes to this in Revelation 2:14. Nicolaus corresponds with the name Balaam as meaning either Lord of the people or he destroyed the people, and that, as the same effect was produced by their doctrine as those by Balaam, that the people were led to commit fornication and join in idolatrous worship, and that they might be called Balaamites or Nicolaitans, and that is the corrupters of the people. So we don't even know if St. Nicholas was a real person. Maybe he was a figurehead for the Lord of the people who led them into idol worship. But St. Nicholas the person was recorded to be alive from around 270 AD to 343 AD, and he was from Myra, which is down here at the bottom of Turkey on the coast. There's a very bottom in the middle where it juts out at the bottom here. So that's a merchant town where the overlords would have been located. It says that the early Christian bishop of Greek descent from the maritime city in modern day Antela during the time of the Roman Empire. Several of the early church fathers mentioned this group, stating that Nicholas the deacon was one of the 7 deacons, and he was the author of the heresy in the sect, and attribute the term Nicolaitans as deriving from that Nicholas, a native of Antioch. Because of the many miracles attributed to his intercession, he is also known as Nicholas the Wonder Worker. St. Nicholas is the patron saint of sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, children, brewers, pawnbrokers, toy makers, unmarried people, and students in various cities and countries around Europe. His reputation evolved among the pious, as was common for early Christian saints, and his legendary habit of secret gift-giving gave rise to the folklore of Santa Claus or Saint Nick through Sinterklaas. An early list makes him an attendee of the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. It says, fewer than 200 years after Nicholas' death, the St. Nicholas Church was built in Myra under the orders of Theodosius II, where he had supposedly served as bishop, and then his remains were moved to a sarcophagus in that church. And they're now supposedly enshrined in the Basilica of St. Nicola. The remaining bone fragments from the sarcophagus were later removed by Venetian sailors and taken to Venice during the First Crusade. So it definitely appears that this is the same guy, or the same figurehead at least, followed by the Nicolaitans, which are admonished in Revelation for being pagan. So wouldn't that make sense, that the Romans and Greeks carried forward their pagan worship in a supposedly Christian saint, but who, as you know, was a wealthy merchant class person who became a deacon, or at least in legend, and then started pretending to do good charitable works, when his literal name, Nicholas in Greek, means conquerors of the lay people. So that's your big boom, St. Nicholas, aka Santa Claus. So the Bible is amazing, and my commenters are really good. I learned so much from y'all, so thank you to Fast Ed for this boom. And thanks for listening.